J'ouvre maintenant la séance.
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to the 32nd meeting of the Transport Infrastructure and Communities. Now, pursuant to the order adopted by the committee is meeting to study labour shortages anticipated in the Canada transportation sector. The meeting will be in hybrid format pursuant to the standing order of 2021. Members can participate in person or by way of Zoom.
Appearing before us today from the Canadian Ferry Association, Mr. Serge Baille, Chief Executive Officer. From the Chamber of Marine Commerce, nous avons Mr.
Magassa Morel-Laforce.
Relations. And from the Freight Management Association of Canada, we have Mr. John Corey, President. Before I turn it over to our witnesses for their opening remarks, I'd like to begin by turning it over to the clerk for some housekeeping. I believe we have to elect our vice chair. Mr. Clerk, I turn it over to you.
All right, thank you for that. So, pursuant to Standing Order 1062, the first vice chair must be a member of the official opposition. I am now prepared to receive motions for the first vice chair.
I would nominate Mark Strahl.
I was going to nominate the same.
All right, well, it has been moved by Annie Kotrakis that Mark Strahl be elected. You did say Mark Strahl?
Yes.
Mark Strahl be elected as first vice chair of the committee. Are there any further motions? No? Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the motion? No? I declare the motion carried and Mark Strahl duly elected first vice chair of the committee.
Congratulations, Mr. Strahl. Is that all that is necessary, Mr. Clerk? Wonderful. Okay, so we will begin with the opening remarks with Mr. Serge Baille. Mr. Baille, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for inviting the Canadian Ferry Association to speak on this important issue. First, let me provide you some background on the sector. Ferries in Canada transport about over 60 million passengers annually, 23 million vehicles, and billions of dollars of goods. Our members provide a crucial linkage to communities. They cross rivers in isolated communities in rural and northern Canada. As an example, that most do not fully realize, there are 3 ferry crossings along the Dempster Highway in the Northwest Territories to get to Inuvik. When ferries do not run, the cost of goods significantly increases in that city. Ferries do not only bring people, but also most goods to islands, such as Newfoundland and Vancouver Island. We also provide urban transit solutions in various municipalities, such as Toronto, Halifax, Vancouver, and others. The Canadian Ferry Association represents most ferry operators across Canada, from crown corporations to Indigenous, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to private operators. We also represent some of the suppliers to the sector. The issue of labour shortage is not new in the marine sector. Indeed, we have an aging workforce. An informal survey of our members sent out in 2019 showed that about 55 to 62% of the employees holding senior positions were able to retire within 5 years. The pandemic has made the issue even more pressing. We have seen unprecedented levels of retirement in the past couple of years. The result is simple. There are increasing numbers of ferry crossings that are cancelled due to labour shortages. This weekend, some ferry crossings between Kingston and Wolfe Island in Ontario were briefly cancelled as the operator was looking to replace a crew member. But you can see weekly in the media instances of crew shortages on the West Coast, East Coast, and indeed throughout Canada, even in the prairies where this is the #1 issue for our operators there. The brief that we submitted to the committee provides some of our recommendations. To be clear, Mr. Chair, there is no magic wand that will solve the issue. There are multiple directions to be explored and each will have an impact. The financial impact of labour shortage in the ferry sector is important. It means goods not arriving or arriving late. It means higher prices for some products. It means employees are not getting to work because they can't get the ferry. It also means people may not be getting home in time or getting to their hospital appointments, etc. Ultimately, it is about communities, and that's what it is essential for us to remember. When ferries do not run, entire communities are affected. There are many considerations I would like to explore some with you. Immigration will not solve all problems, but it is an important avenue to look at. We thank Transport Canada for having taken some steps in the right direction with the support from Global Affairs on the signing of agreements recognizing credentials, but more can be done and more needs to be done soon. Technology is also an important consideration, but the regulations that need to accompany the use of new technology also need to follow, and we're seeing challenges in that. Can working conditions be improved? Absolutely, always, but I would say that ferry operators are normally employers of choices, and working conditions are very good already. Raising salaries may attract a few people, but then others will raise their salaries, and this endless race to poach each other's employee will end up benefiting no one. Employers' unions and training institutions all have a role to play. This is why you will see, as an example, some recommendations in our brief that deal with hybrid, in-person, and virtual training as an example. Our recommendations provided in our brief are in 4 categories. International recruitment, again, the signing of agreements with other countries is essential. Training, from virtual training to changing the requirement that sees institutions in the marine sector refuse international students. Modernizing crewing requirements that deal with technology and the need to modernize some regulation and adopt a risk-based approach. Data, better data collection needs to occur to have a clearer picture on of the existing issue. Mr. Chair, I look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bai. Next, from the Chamber of Marine Commerce, nous avons Monsieur Magessa.
Mr. Laforce, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes. Mr. Chairperson and members of the committee, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to speak with you today.
Represents more than 100 marine industry stakeholders, including major Canadian and American shippers, ports, terminals, and marine service providers, as well as Canadian domestic ship owners. Le secteur maritime
Canada's marine sector moves goods and people across the country with the least environmental impact of any mode of transportation.
During the pandemic, seafarers and shore personnel were designated essential workers and have continued their important work to ensure that Canada's supply chain remains resilient and responsive to deliver the goods that Canadians count on.
Canada has an extensive network of private wharves and public ports that support international trade, domestic industries, and the movement of people. There are approximately 200 Canadian vessels operating in the country in the commercial arena supporting Canada-US trade and domestic commerce. Canada's marine sector includes over 1,000 employers who employ over 100,000 professional employees in both the private and public sectors.
To build the domestic marine sector workforce ultimately benefits other key sectors of the economy: agriculture, construction, manufacturing, natural resources, and tourism, that rely heavily on having access to marine transportation for their supply chain requirements. L'industrie maritime est sous-réglementée.
The marine industry is federally regulated, which includes most positions on a commercial vessel. However, the federal government provides very little support to training institutions and students in the maritime field. The federal government needs to dedicate funds on a recurring basis to support the training of new employees in the private sector, the Coast Guard, and other understaffed sectors. My colleague is not unfortunately here in the room today, so I'll read her remarks out loud.
Foundation was launched in 2020 to help address workforce development challenges in the private and public marine sector. Our partners include employers such as marine shipping companies, unions, pilots, and marine colleges, as well as key government departments that have maritime responsibilities, including the Canadian Coast Guard, Transport Canada, and the Transportation Safety Board. Like our multimodal partners in trucking and rail, we have a tremendous challenge ahead. The Canadian marine sector is already struggling to fill positions across the country, and in recent years, labor shortages have even led to ships being idle temporarily. Marine colleagues are finding it difficult to hire teachers. Government agencies are competing against private companies for the same small and aging talent pool. For the most part, the marine industry operates efficiently and often quietly away from the public eye. Consequently, awareness of the marine sector careers are low. Most youth and those looking for a second career do not think of seafaring or many related career paths within the industry. You should be aware that labor market data for the marine sector is scarce, and what does exist is usually dated or incomplete. But a recent study conducted by Transport Canada found that 43% of Canadian marine transportation workforce is expected to retire over the next 10 years. This figure is even higher in critical positions such as engineering officers and deck officers. Transport Canada estimates that there will be a need to hire approximately 19,000 new workers over the next 10 years. It is important to note that building our future pipeline is an urgent problem as the marine sector depends on an ongoing talent pool willing to undergo specific training at all levels. It is a skill-intensive industry for shoreside and especially seagoing positions. For example, to become a captain on a larger commercial ship can take 6 to 8 years. We believe the federal government could help us in 3 key areas. These are areas in which many other sectors have received government assistance. The first is working with us to improve marine sector labor force data analysis to better identify the true scope of the problem and benchmark and track progress. The second area is funding to help increase awareness as a variety of marine career path, high wages, and high job match rate are largely unknown to the general public, particularly high school students. Thirdly, is working with the sector to improve the availability, reach, funding opportunities for training programs. There are limited numbers of marine training facilities or colleges in Canada, and many prospective students would need to travel and pay for both program tuition and living expenses. As a result, marine training can be difficult to access for many communities, but also for workers already in the industry who are looking to upgrade their skills and licenses. Finally, as an example, 2 of our college members have recently applied for funding to develop new program offering that will help lower the overall cost of training and increase marine training accessibility for First Nation and equity deserving groups. These programs include increasing online courses and accelerating the adoption of virtual reality and simulation in marine training. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the marine industry in Canada.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Morel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morel-Laforce.
Mr. Corey, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak today about anticipated labor shortages in the Canadian transportation sector. The FMA represents purchasers of freight transportation, including rail, marine, air, and trucking in Canada. I hope I'm in the right meeting because I will be speaking about rail and trucking labor issues. Okay. Like other G7 countries, we have an aging population and a low birth rate. Our recent COVID experience has highlighted the reality that it's not enough skilled workers to fill all vacancies. Coupled with the pandemic, work-life balance has become a more important factor to workers. Salary alone is no longer a chief motivator. How is this affecting transportation services and the supply chain? We have all experienced the supply chain chaos that has been exacerbated by COVID. At the beginning of the pandemic, Transport Canada deemed both rail and trucking services essential. Truckers and rail workers helped Canada to continue to function during COVID by continuing to move vital food, fuel, PPE, chemicals, and other necessary materials. Without this transportation service, the effect of the pandemic would have been much worse. Even though transportation workers performed admirably and the job got done, there are 2 main labor problems. First, we have an aging workforce. Generally, baby boomers who powered the economy through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s have left the workforce or are retiring en masse. There are not enough skilled workers to adequately replace them. Not everyone can work from home. The truck driver shortage continues to be a problem. The Conference Board of Canada now finds that the average truck driver's age is 46 years, compared with the average for all workers of 41.5 years. The industry needs to attract younger workers. It's estimated that there are 23,000 driver vacancies right now, and that will go up to 56,000 by 2024. This does not bode well for the Canadian economy going forward. In the rail industry, rail crews and locomotive shortages, not rail cars, is a recurring problem through periods of negative network fluidity. There is a great concern in the shipper community that the above average grain crop of this year, the coming winter, and staff shortages will create chaos on the rails going forward. The second employment issue is changing attitudes towards work. Workers are looking at work differently today than they have in the past. COVID did not cause this change, but it has certainly sped it up. Working from home, virtual meetings, demand for a better work-life balance are issues currently on the table. Employee turnover in the trucking sector is very high, around 70%. Drivers routinely leave their employer or leave the industry. This turnover can be attributed to long hours, pressure to deliver, poor food and rest conditions on the road, and lack of recognition and appreciation. In the rail industry, the practice of precision scheduled railroading, operations focusing on sweating the assets, does not only apply to equipment. Staff is cut to a bare minimum, resulting in increased pressure on employees that are left. In the U.S., railways and unions are currently working out their labor agreement. Although wages will go up 24% over the next 3 years, some union members are not ratifying agreements because they say management holds no regard for their quality of life, illustrated by their stubborn reluctance to provide a higher quality of paid-off time, especially for sickness. Employees feel management is more concerned about operating ratios and profits, not workers' well-being. No wonder they can't find anyone to employ. So what are the possible solutions? One way to increase the number of workers available in the short term is increase immigration. I understand the solution may not be that simple, but it is worth the effort. Let's remember Canada is a country built with the help of people who came from other places. For truck drivers, pay an hourly wage, which prioritizes safety, thereby reducing the need to get there at any cost mentality. Require new energy-efficient trucks and encourage digitalization of the industry. Make trucking a skilled trade. Many trades require an apprentice program and mentoring, especially in Europe. Make trucking a vocation instead of a default career. Ensure there is sufficient funding for the necessary infrastructure that is needed for the future. Ensure there are more safe places for drivers to eat and rest. Railways need to be more cognizant of the labor market realities and their customer service requirements when downsizing their workforce in response to temporary volume downturns. Excessive cuts followed by deliberately slow restaffing should not be an option. Leave some slack in the system, make the supply chain more resilient. Provide better working conditions for rail workers with less punitive action for legitimate time off. Having more workers working less hours results in safer working conditions and a happier and therefore more productive workforce. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corey. We're beginning our round of questioning today with Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My first question is going to go to Mr. Margisa. We've heard a lot of discussion about labor shortages, and I'm aware that there was roughly approximately 20% reduction in grain shipment last year in the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Seaway. And you spoke about some of the collateral effects of the labor shortages, and you mentioned that even ships were remaining idle because of the labor shortages. I'd like to just talk about how that impacts on our food supply chain. And I'm assuming that this also created a problem of congestion at the ports because of the shortage of labor. And my concern is that because you would have shipping containers sitting at the ports longer, is there anything that legislatively you think that we could do, that government could do in order to, say, modernize the Canada Marine Act to help with this problem?
It is a vast question. On the grain shipments, so most of the grain will be exported in bulk cargo. So your typical route will either be going west or east. In the case of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence, the cargo will be moved by train, let's say to Thunder Bay. From there, will be put on a laker and brought further east for export. So most of the grain in the country is being exported. In that regard, the Seaway and has a capacity right now at about 50%. So we could double the amount of ships crossing the Seaway today without impacting much on traffic. So we could double it. That's certainly something that we could do. Although manning vessels and manning them in the future could become a difficult thing to do.
And I understand that currently the Great Lakes St. Lawrence Seaway is just operating at 50% capacity. Is that correct?
Yeah, right now we could double the amount of ships sailing in the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence with the current infrastructure we have.
And the reason why you haven't been able to increase the usage of the waterways to alleviate pressures on, say, the primary ports is because of this inherent labor shortage problem.
That, and I would say container shipping is highly limited right now because of CBSA regulation that prohibits containers to move on ships. They can move on train or trucks, but they're unable to be moved by ship. And we know that several of our port members within the Great Lakes are asking to have sufferance warehouses where they could actually host those containers, which is something that is not happening.
So I understand that the Canada Marine Act limits the Canadian Port Authority's ability to generate additional financing and remain competitive by actually limiting the ability to develop inland ports. And the development of inland ports would reduce congestion at primary ports. And in places like Vancouver, we know that there are terminals, there are inland ports, but those ports are owned by the Singapore Port Authority. Do you have any explanation why the government permits Singapore to own inland ports but not Canadians?
I'm not familiar with that port in particular. What I do know, though, is port members are currently anxious to see the Port Modernization Act tabled in Parliament. They have several requests. Yes, they would like to develop their land and also expand their capacity to borrow to make more development. That is certainly something port members are keen to see in upcoming amendments of the Port Modernization Act.
And is there anything that specifically that you believe that this government can do to remedy this unfair treatment of Canadian Port Authority?
Oh, I do believe that we could use the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Seaway to its full capacity to alleviate pressure on other modes of transport that have been touched by the pandemic or that are at capacity. We can think of our road system that's already congested. If we do put more containers on ships rather than on trucks, we would move more product faster inland without congesting the highways.
Okay. And so that's not necessarily fixed necessarily by having inland ports. It's just getting the product to the rail.
The fix would come with regulation. So we would need to see a CBSA regulation amended to allow the movement of containers via the national sea waterways. We would also need to see CBSA expand and approve more sufferance warehouses. I hear there's 17 applications right now on CBSA's desk that are not being processed. That could certainly help leverage the container problems in this country, yes.
And those warehouses, are they paid for by CBSA, or who pays for those warehouses too?
The CBSA will provide the agents that will process the imports, so that's a key part. And they also need to approve. There's a series of security requirements that need to be followed. But from what I hear from members who would like to see that happen, is they're ready to commit the capital and make the investment to make this a reality. what they're waiting for is the regulatory approval.
And so what are the
Thank
main
you very
government
much,
policies?
Dr. Lewis.
Thank you.
Next, we have Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr.
have
Chair.
6 minutes.
And I do appreciate the line of questioning from Ms. Lewis. It's nice to see that the appreciation that she has for the Great Lakes. I see Mr. Massey here from the NDP as well, who's been a real champion for the Great Lakes. And Brian, I'm glad to see you here. But I have to agree with the comment earlier. The bottom line is that the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence will create that fluidity that this country needs to bring trade, not only domestically, but internationally, to strengthen our overall trade performance. But I have to be very specific, especially after we're now digging in deeper into the CTA review that was completed in 2015 by David Emerson, as well as the transportation logistics strategies that this committee has both commissioned and completed in an interim, and hopefully in the future in a final stage. The ports modernization review that's already been mentioned, the supply chain report that we've embarked on, and now the labor strategy, all part and parcel together. So I guess the final comments before I get to my question is this. There's no doubt that we understand that the partners include the companies, labor, supply chain within the marine industry, the trucking industry, the rail, and the air industry. We understand the effects on the overall supply chain when it comes to labor shortages. Ship stock and at docks, no captains, no cooks, no engineers, no deckhands, no mates. The ship's docked. That cargo is now held 1, 2 days, 3 days, maybe a week in terms of getting to port. We also understand that the effects on the multimodal partners is great as well. It's a domino effect. If a ship docks, the trucks and trains wait. They have nothing to carry because it's still sitting on the ship. And then finally, what do we do about it? We're moving forward now with a strategy which I would only expect would not just be specific to one of the different methods of transportation, but frankly would actually be a multimodal transportation labor strategy that would include all methods of transportation. So with that, I'm going to ask all three of you the same question and jump in as you see fit. But I'll give you an example in the Niagara region. We're now embarking on the construction building of a Great Lakes Innovation and Training Facility that will include education vis-a-vis the environment of the Great Lakes, the ecosystem, the economic side when it comes to working with the companies, the unions, such as the SIU, and others, and of course other NGOs to be part of that facility from the operating standpoint. The key is to integrate the distribution and logistics, working hand in hand with up-to-date movement of goods along strategic trade corridors, such as that on the Great Lakes, integrated with road, rail, air, aligned with up-to-date data analysis, leading to integrated management. My point there is that it's not just about the person driving the vehicle, truck, ship, plane, or train. It's also about how it's moved and the training that goes along with that. So a question to all three of you. How do you see that playing out? How do you see the trucks, the trains, the rail, the boats moving, not only in terms of the product, but also in an integrated fashion, and then therefore the training that's needed to accomplish that?
I'll go first, if that's okay, John. Right now we have a supply chain that is really silos. Each member of the supply chain does what's best for that particular company or group. And what you're talking about is coordination of that supply chain so that the most effective and efficient movements are made. That's going to take a lot of, if I could use the term, political will to force the members of the supply chain to be on the same team. Shippers want that to happen because, initially what's good for me is good right now. But if everyone pulls together, it's going to be good for Canada in the long run. We're going to become a much more effective, efficient trading partner. And that's going to be good for everyone because it trickles down. The question is, how do you do that? And I think that's the conundrum that we have. The report that came out by the Supply Chain Task Force, I think, is a good start. There are some interesting ideas in there. How do we do that? A lot of things are already in place that can help us have a more effective, efficient supply chain. Strengthening the Canada Transportation Act is one of them. There is legislation already there to regulate railways, which are, in this country, let's be honest, monopolies. And there are ways to level that playing field. But there has to be some will to actually do what needs to be done to level that playing field.
Thank you, Mr. Corey. Mr. LaForest.
Yeah.
Mr. Bai.
Great. Serge Buis. You talked about coordination, and indeed there needs to be better coordination of the supply chain. Some recommendations were made to the task force. Other committees are also studying the supply chain. So I'm going to focus on the labor shortage, which is the study of this committee, if you don't mind. You talked about training. You don't train a marine worker in the same way you train a truck driver. So, while you can coordinate certain things, the training on that side is a little bit more difficult to coordinate training. However, the coordination of the supply chain, I'll give it to you, is essential. What the government can do to help at the present time is to look at some of the legislation it has on the training side and modernize some of that legislation. The Canada Shipping Act can be looked at to be modernized a little bit to enable more flexibility, training institutions to look at foreign students as an example, or to enable virtual hybrid training. You can train a doctor virtually, partially in a hybrid model, but you can't train a marine worker in a hybrid model right now. So we know that there are some movements made, but the movements are very slow, sir. And I think your help and the help of this committee on the labor shortage is essential to drive the agenda a little bit faster.
Thank you, Mr. Bai. Mr. LaForce?
I think the Supply Chain Task Force report that was released recently highlights the need for more data sharing, and I think if funding is made available and that there's support for doing more of it, and you link that to a updated curriculum where you have seafarers that can handle the information that's providing to them, we can be more efficient, we can deliver faster.
Thank you, Mr. LaForce. And that is exactly what I'm drilling down to. Is basically not working in silos, training people to just simply drive trucks or steer ships or navigate ships or trains or planes. It's also the next layer, which is in fact that data integration so that they're being trained to do what they're actually disciplined to do with respect to driving, navigating, flying, or engineering. But also on top of that, the next layer is that integration of distribution logistics systems so that they're being trained to do that as well. And then, of course, working all together in a multimodal fashion to get that word out there so that people are actually interested in getting into the industry. Would you find that as an advantage?
Thank you very much, Mr. Badaway.
Thank you.
Next question, Mr. Baslo Duval. You have 6 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I'll start immediately with a question targeting Mr. Morel-Laforce and Mr. Bui. Now, I have a colleague from the Bloc Québécois, the member for Témiscouata. At the last Parliament, he had introduced legislation to modernize the Sea Trading Act. And, in fact, that was called for by a Rimouski Maritime Association. There are a lot of people that come to Canada to learn how to operate boats, and then they go home. And unfortunately, and if I'm not mistaken here, they required permanent residency in order to be able to have their operating license. Now, is it a good practice, especially in the context of a labour shortage, where these folks learned their trade here in Canada? They were trained here, so they were able to operate Canadian-based vessels. Should this act be amended so that those people could remain in Canada? Well, you'll note that in our recommendations in the brief submitted to the committee, that piece of legislation was interesting. I spoke to the Quebec Maritime Institute recently, and the Canadian Association of Marine Colleges tabled a report in June. They're waiting for responses. There's discussions underway, and that's as far as the hybrid projects are concerned. But when it comes to foreign students, yes, there is one. We recommend an amendment to this legislation. Why? Because in other professions it's not an issue, but apparently in the seafaring sector it is a problem, so that would be a welcome change. Well, I agree, and I would add by saying that the immigration sector is something that we're looking closely, whether it be recognition of foreign credentials or identifying foreign candidates and bringing them into our system. We've noticed that it takes a lot of time, even though a lot of positions on a ship will be classified as priority positions by Immigration Canada, but out in the field, it takes about 2 years from when a candidate is selected by a shipping company and when they actually get their work permit to work in Canada. So it is a resource issue. Now, if I've understood correctly, this is a problem with the delays in processing foreigners' work permits. Now, I don't know what you think of this analogy, but there are a lot of companies in the maritime sector in my riding, in the Lower St. Lawrence. Now, I also have a lot of workers in the agriculture sector who are calling me desperately saying they're trying to bring temporary foreign workers and it takes forever. And when they finally get here, perhaps they find another job or they're not interested in coming to Canada anymore. Is the whole delay in processing immigration files an issue to your minds? Well, absolutely, yes, it is. And that's something that we've noted in our sector. There are workers who are identified positions. Companies want to bring them to Canada. Because of the processing delays and the red tape, well, unfortunately, the workers found another job. Yes, we've noted the same thing. There are 2.6 million files that are backed up at Immigration Canada, apparently. That's a statistic I saw today. And we have a labour shortage here in Canada. And quite categorically, this is an issue. It needs to be addressed in short order. We have the same examples to offer. There are folks who apply to work in Canada and are held up because of immigration red tape. But I would like to thank Transport Canada for having entered into agreements, bilateral agreements with a number of countries in order to recognise foreign credentials, certificates and diplomas. That enables them to access Canada's labour market more quickly. Now a question directed at the three witnesses. I don't have much time I have left, Mr. Chairperson, but you spoke at length about the ageing workforce in both the maritime and trucking sectors, and other witnesses have testified similarly in the past. Have you thought of ways of ensuring that those workers remain in the labour market longer? That might be part of a potential solution in the Bloc Québécois. We're thinking of tax credits for experienced workers, but perhaps there are other positive measures. Mr. Corey, since you haven't had an opportunity to speak yet, would you like to respond first?
Certainly. I think it is apparent that people are working longer. And that is a good thing, and we should take advantage of that. There is one area I find an incongruency is that as we sort of digitalize the environment that people work in, it's potential that younger workers are much more better suited for those kinds of technological changes. Older workers can learn new tricks, but I'm not sure that's someplace we should be focusing our energies.
Mr. Morel-Laforce, you have just a short time remaining. Well, we already have senior employees. One of the chief engineers is over 73, so I don't know how long a person can stay in their position, but that's a delicate issue. Thank you very much. Next question, Mr. Massey.
You have 6 minutes unless Mr. Bachrach has returned.
Thank you. Yeah, he's just behind me, but he's going to like to be subjected to me for the first round here. So you can get him back later. And thanks for having me, Mr. Chair, and to our witnesses. Actually, on international trade, we are studying the container issue and the shortages too. So maybe we'll forward some information that might be helpful for the committee. And thank you. It's good to be back here. Real quickly, Mr. Badaway has done some really good work on the Canada-U.S. Parliamentary Association, an initiative where carving out a special spot for the Great Lakes. So we now actually focus on other political contacts in NGOs and businesses on the Great Lakes side. And it was an initiative that he started, and it's kind of formalized and created another level of opportunity. I'm wondering whether what you're hearing from American counterparts and whether or not a similar strategy with labor might be a way to go if they're suffering the same kind of pains we are, since that many of our markets are integrated. And ridings like myself and Mr. Lewis here, we have about 10,000 trucks per day that go through our communities, and he probably actually gets more because they go back and forth amongst his riding even more. So even though I have the border, but any thoughts of reaching out to our American and maybe perhaps even Mexican counterparts about some of the labor shortages that we have as a unified approach to making sure that they're in place? And maybe start with Mr. Corey and go across the table.
I think it was shown during the pandemic that in very short order, the Canadian border can be crossed by either side in an emergency. And that was done specifically with the flooding and essentially the break of the supply chain in British Columbia last year. So it can be done fast if they want to do it fast. I think that's an important thing, that we should have a better coordination between the two countries for any cross-border activity. That will increase the efficiency, and that will take the stress off the driver shortage initially. But to your point, I think that having some kind of common market where labor can be easily transferred from one jurisdiction to another would be a very good idea, especially since we have other countries like Mexico and the United States that seem to have a lot more people who would be able to come and help Canadians with their labor shortage.
That's great, yeah. Because I think of an auto truck in Windsor here. I don't really care whether, I want a Canadian to deliver it, an American to deliver it, and if we're all integrated, and it could be a Mexican to deliver it. I mean, we want the jobs here, but if we're short, then just got to keep the plants running. I'm sorry, over to the Marine.
Yeah, well, I would say that the Americans are investing heavily in their port infrastructure, in their training as well. I know that there's ships that are run by cadet in the United States, and of course the scale is different, but still they're not shy of investing in their future workforce by spending on it, so that they can have a future and they can have seafarers that man their ship. Because similarly to the Canadian model, it's American seafarers that man American ships, and so they invest in their training, and that the results are there. I mean, they're manned by American seafarers.
Okay. Just to follow up real quickly, and before I go to Mr. Corey, do you work with, I have the HMCS Hunter in my riding, so it's a naval operation where we have cadets and so forth. Do you actually recruit, or I've never seen that kind of going on in our community. We're a port city, so I'm just wondering whether there's attempts to kind of recruit out of our military operations as well too. Some of the positions are part-time too as well, like reservists. So I'm just wondering whether you kind of access that, or should we think about that as well?
I would start by leading that the information on the industry is scarce. Like the NOx haven't been updated in ages, so so the National Classification System for Occupation. So it's very hard for me to tell you like how many engineers are there and all the positions. So since they haven't been updated, it's very hard to track the labor pool right now. It's even harder to track that labor pool based on where they were before.
Okay, so that's interesting to follow up. Quickly, over to Mr. Corey here. You mentioned actually a really good point with regards to conditions of work. There was a great rail report that came out that talked about the culture of intimidation and fear from CN&CP upon workers when they move to the safety management system. But what can we do for our trucking, especially our independent truckers? Like I have a lot in my community. Some of them don't have benefits. They don't have a number of different kind of supports that way, or they're also being leveraged to fund their own thing. Is there things that we can do as like a cooperative or some type of other system to help link them somehow to offset some of their costs? Like some of their financing is unbelievable, and then they don't get the benefits that as an independent person.
Right. The trucking industry is extremely fragmented. There are many owner-operators, and there are big companies too. We have one member who, the industry, as I mentioned, has about 70% turnover. Theirs is 0.77%. Wow. So we asked them, what are you doing? Well, we pay hourly wages, so there's no pressure on you have to deliver or else. They have benefits. They have new trucks. They turn over their trucks every 3 years, so you're using good equipment. They are moving towards technology with the log, data log. So they're providing a good workplace for their employees, and people stay. They also have a mentoring program. These are kind of things that we have to make available to people who want to get into an industry or a career, and it costs money. So you need to have programs where people could do it. You know, making a quick buck, it's great for today, but it's not going to help us going forward. So I think there needs to be, and there is on the provincial level, there's training programs for truckers, but obviously we need more.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair. Is that all my time?
You had 20 seconds left, and I'll be glad to take it back.
No, I'll cede that to Mr. Lewis and thank the indulgence of the committee and wish you all the best. Thank you, and thank you to the witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Massey. Next, we have Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, you have 5 minutes and 20 seconds. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and of course, thank you to my colleague. I'll use up all 20 seconds and say thank you to Mr. Massey. So this is a really, really good study. And I'm ever happy to be on this committee now. So just a few initial thoughts. First thought is my riding of Essex, I'm surrounded by Lake St. Clair, the Detroit River, and Lake Erie. And so we've got ports, we've got ferries, we have the HMCS Hunter, as Mr. Massey mentioned, we have barges, we have the Coast Guard sitting in our own backyard, police boats. The first thing I would say is, and I've already brought this up to to St. Clair College. I floated this about 2 months ago, and they're very much on board. I think it'd be a great idea to start a training center in the area. It's centralized to Canada. It'll we can put people on the ferries. We can put them on the freighters. We have ADM, which ships grain across to the United States. They can learn to navigate. We've got the military. So that's just a point of interest. I've already opened those talks up. But I guess my question would be, where, Mr. Laforce, where are those two training centers specifically? Where are they at, the two that you spoke to?
Well, the one that submitted an application for ESDC and they're waiting for, so you got the Institut Maritime, so it's Rimouski, it's along the St. Lawrence. You got the Georgian College as well, that has, so it's in Ontario. Okay. So these are the two main on the east, I would say.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. So, fortunate enough to have a family cottage on Manitoulin Island. So the Chi-Chi-Mon Ferry takes our family over there every year. Sometimes twice a year if you're not in politics, I suppose. And I went over there right after the House rose. I was on there, and the cooks and the deckhands were all speaking English, but they sounded a lot like they were from Newfoundland. So I got inquisitive. I started asking questions. And come to find out that nearly 75% of the folks in the Chi-Chi-Mon actually came in from Newfoundland. So, of course, I went to Minister O'Regan. I said, Minister, you realize I'm stealing your people, sir. And he said, I don't know what you mean. So obviously his office apparently overlooks the port in St. John's. Long story short is, my point is, we're stealing Peter to pay Paul. Because if we're taking them from Newfoundland, fantastic folks, love them to death, that's not getting the job done. So I'm wondering, I guess I'll take it one step further. So last week I was in Taiwan, got a chance to visit the Taipei port. And this port is so incredibly digitalized. So at the end of the day, it goes like this. You get a ship of 24,000 sea containers being offloaded, one every 30 minutes, which was remarkable in and of itself. And so in speaking to the CEOs of the port, they said, yeah, so we took our labor force from somewhere in the 41 people per shift down to 18. Wow. He said, but we hired more people. Because we're so modernized at our ports, we had to hire way more truck drivers, which I'm going to suggest it's probably easier to get truck drivers than it is for folks to use booms and all those types of things. Just with regard to the ports, and I'm saying this because of the labor side of things, any idea with regard to our ports on the East Coast or West Coast, if that's something that we're actively going after, and is there something the government can do to help that out?
You mean in regards to investment for new technology?
That's correct.
I know for sure, like the Port of Montreal is heavily investing in new technology. It's expanding its container terminal, for instance. So it's something that ports are aware of, but they do have limits in terms of their investment capacity. That's because of the act that governs their operation. It is due for review. We're anxiously waiting for the government to table amendments to it, and we're hopeful that it will allow ports to invest more in new technology so they can be like the Taipei port.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, how much time left, sir?
You have 1 minute.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll just finish it off with one question. So and I don't know who I should address this to. I do know there was an issue between our western ports and our eastern ports with regard to our labor force. And so it's the amount of hours worked compared to the hours that they have off. I believe the western ports have more time off than the eastern ports have. But it doesn't necessarily affect each, but I'm wondering, would it be beneficial to all of our shipping industry, specifically to our labor folks, to have one standard for Canada?
To that, I would say that we would need some intervention to an extent to provide for labor to continue in the event of disruptions. That's something that's been happening in the past, and it affects the reputation of a port. So once a port goes through several labor issues, it can affect its international reputation, and shippers will try to avoid it so that they want to avoid disruption. I'm not aware of the difference between West and East, but for sure some federal intervention to just help mediate any problems on the labor side would be gladly appreciated by members. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Next, we have Ms. Koutrakis. Ms. Koutrakis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And at first, I'd like to welcome once again our new members, new colleagues on Transport Committee. I know I can speak for all of us around the table that we look very much forward to working with you. I also wanted to say thank you very much to our witnesses for appearing here before us this afternoon. I wanted to quickly ask you, each one of you, briefly, if we can, what your thoughts are on the recently released report on the by the Supply Chain Task Force, and more specifically, I'm looking, which of the recommendations do you think are most important, and which ones do you think they got wrong, and if so, which ones, and how can we do better? I only have 5 minutes. So I'll be a leader and say, Monsieur Morel, la force.
Yeah, okay, I'll go first. I don't think they got any of them wrong. I think there's a lot of good ideas in there. The question is, can they all be implemented? Probably not. Ones that I personally like, again, it doesn't have much to do with the labor issue, but I think strengthening the Canada Transportation Act to give it more power, similar to potentially powers that the STB has in the U.S., where they can make quick decisions that are very timely and get things rolling. I also like the extended interswitching, because I'm a rail nerd, and I think that will afford shippers more options to move their goods. It will also move inland ports and staging grounds away from those interchanges further out, but still allow them to be able to take advantage of interswitching rates. I think the idea of having a supply chain czar, someone who can coordinate, is a very good idea. How that will actually be done, that is still a bit of a mystery, but I think it's a good idea and maybe worth pursuing. Thank you.
I'll definitely second that. Second that. The idea of having a secretariat that would work with several departments that are involved in supply chain and solving issues as they come is a great idea. It needs to be just provided resources to take place. That's the key part. We need to follow up on the recommendations of the task force, because I think it's really they went out and listened to the industry, and it's reflective of that. I'm hearing lots of positive feedback about it. Now the next step is to actually implement it. On the labor side, during the summit, there was a specialized program launched through ESDC on which we are still waiting on announcements. What I hear is there's $1 billion worth of ask and only 300 million available for it. Well, it shows that there's a lack in investment on the labor side from the federal government, and we should definitely increase it so that we don't run out of specialized workers to man ships in Canada.
Very quickly, the report was good, lots of great recommendations. we're keen on seeing the actions coming out of that rather than just a report. Having a tsar and the secretariat is also great. We're having issues manning other departments right now, so I don't know about creating a big bureaucracy on top of everything. I don't know that's the solution to everything, creating new secretariat and everything. So I'm just a little bit careful on this. I mean, the main thing right now is some of the action. So I'll look forward to the implementation of some of the recommendations.
Thank you. And to the marine sector, so Mr. Morel-LaFrance and Monsieur Bouy, are there aspects of labor shortages in the marine transport sector that are particularly unique compared to other modes?
It's being known by the general population. I think recent surveys made by the SODES in Quebec show that about 40% of the population is unaware of the sector completely. So if you translate that to young Canadians or Canadian looking for a second career, they're mostly in that category where they don't know that the sector has great offerings for them, has the possibility to have good paying job rapidly. But they're just unaware of the sector. So building that awareness is key to build the pipeline of workers for the industry.
Yeah, the awareness is one thing. We are, every industry right now is competing for workers, right? Mm-hmm. So if we take more workers from the Canadian population, we're going to limit for another one. The issue is immigration. And are we unique in that point? There's certain uniqueness to the marine sector in terms of the ability for us to train at training institutions and for those trainees to remain in Canada, the ability to do hybrid training as well. Those are quick fixes that can be done quickly by this government, right? This is not long, drawn-out studies and work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ms. Koutrakis. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur
Mr. Barcelot-Duval, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Earlier, I gave Mr. Corey and Mr. B the opportunity to talk about experienced workers. Pips, Mr. Morel-LaFrance, you have something to say about that. And Mr. B said that there are 70-year-old workers who won't be there forever, but I've noticed in my entourage, at my age, we see our parents starting to retire, and it's the case of my friends too, and yet a number of them could work a further 5 or 10 years, but they say that, well, it doesn't really make sense because they're working in order to pay taxes, and the taxation system doesn't really make it favourable. So is there some way of keeping more senior workers in the labour market for longer? Response, I think the industry would be interested in having retirement age people continue to work. We have an ageing workforce, and the more specialised workers are, the older they are often, and yet they're an integral part of various shipping companies. And I think the industry would indeed be favourable. Now, another question, perhaps a question for you, sir, and Mr. Bouy. In terms of automation and new technology that might come to the fore, can that address the labour shortage in some ways? I know it can't completely do so, but from your point of view, is that a potential solution? Response, well, the industry is getting automated. For example, the seaways are navigated in a technological fashion nowadays, and that, in a sense, replaces a number of workers because of the automation. So we do have machines that help to address the labour shortage, but you have to train people to operate those machines too. And that's another category of employment, isn't it? So automation is a good thing, and the industry is a stakeholder and fully engaged in the development and use of technologies. But as I said, you need workers to operate that technology. Indeed, there is new technology. A 40-year-old ship doesn't look like ships from nowadays, and there are new technologies which reduce the number of crew, but they are subject to Transport Canada regulations that aren't sometimes up to date and modern as the new technology itself. So it's a question not only of technology, but of the need to overhaul and update regulations. Thank you very much, Mr. Barceló-Duval. 2.5 minutes is quick.
Backrack, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the committee for welcoming my colleague, Mr. Massey, for a round of questions. And it's great to hear from all the witnesses today. Good to see you again, Mr. Bai. Obviously, ferries are of a great interest to Northwest BC, so perhaps I'll direct my questions towards you for a couple of minutes. I'm curious about salaries in your sector. We heard from the trucking industry at a previous meeting that the salaries in the trucking industry have gone up, and if I recall, it was 15 to 20% in the past 2 years. Some pretty staggering numbers. Have salaries shown similar increases in the ferry industry?
I wouldn't say to that extent, but they are increasing. But I would say we're extremely competitive. I mean, I was talking to Transport Canada a few days ago, where they mentioned that we were actually poaching some of their candidates because we are offering very good salaries. So I would say that we are already there, and maybe we don't have a catch up to do versus other sectors. We are already offering extremely good salaries, and mainly the reason for this is we're competing internationally as well.
So Mr. Bai, just following up on that, and earlier you had some comments that I think might have raised some eyebrows, saying raising salaries may attract a few people, but others will raise their salaries in this endless race to poach each other's employees, and no one will benefit from that. One could suggest that the employees benefit from higher salaries. Is raising salaries to remain competitive in the industry not a way to increase retention of existing employees? If there are others in the shipping industry or other transportation industries that are coming for your employees, how do you address that?
Well, I understand, but if we raise salaries in the ferry sector, those employees are going to come from another sector. They may come from the shipping sector. So suddenly the shipping sector is going to have a crash. They're going to be dealing with something else on there. We are actually competing with Transport Canada and the Coast Guard right now on some salaries, and the cruise ship. So the comment is meant that, at one point, we're competing for the same group of people. So going up from salaries is great on all sides, and absolutely the employees always benefit from increased salaries. It has to be viable, and it has to be a solution that ensures that all the sector can continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Backrack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Next, you're welcome, Mr. Backrack. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you to all the witnesses, and thank you for providing recommendations. And we note the brief that the Ferry Association sent with not only recommendations but detailed recommendations. So that was helpful, I think, as we consider our report. I just want to go back to the whole immigration issue and sourcing workers from foreign places, because you've mentioned here a shortage of 19,000 workers in the next decade, in the marine sector. We've heard testimony already of 28,000 and growing shortage of truckers in Canada at the moment. So we've got these shortages, and we've heard repeatedly over the course of now the third meeting on this study that immigration is a potential solution or important solution. And of course we agree with that has always been the case in Canada. But I guess my concern is that there's no quick fixes, and you've mentioned the fact that it's a 2-year wait, right? There's a 2-year delay, and I'm sure you're hearing that from members and of your organizations and people that you're dealing with. And so we know, I had heard you mentioned 2.6 million case backlog. I had heard 2.7 million case. We can split the difference. That's fine. But we know that the system is broken. We know that with this government, a lot of things are broken. We saw that with passports, with the airport mess, and et cetera. So how much trouble are we in if we have to wait 2 years?
Well, in the ferry sector, we're in trouble. We're often, most times, one person away from tying the ship and not enabling passengers and goods to come through. When last year the vaccine mandates came and some employees refused to work, we tied a number of ferries. We tied a number of ferries down. And now that it's removed, some employees chose to come back to work, some others didn't choose to come back to work. We're in trouble on that. Attracting people through immigration is a key, but you're correct. We need to fix some major issues there.
Well, you have plenty of industries in this country that rely on marine shipping, bulk cargo. I mean, take iron ore that goes to Hamilton to be made in car parts. So you take the grain farmers from the West that are relying on it for their exports. So in the event this shipping stops because there's no seafarers to man these ships, well, you can see a decrease in your exports. You can see a decrease in your productivity of major industries. Yeah, absolutely.
Is it possible to quantify, we're going to go from over the course of the short term, long term, there's been recommendations that you've all made, and obviously there can be fixes put into place, but that's not going to happen tomorrow. So are we going from 19,000 to what? A couple of years down the road, or 28,000 truck drivers short is what we heard in the last meeting. What are we looking at in 5 years down the road? Any sense of that?
Well, I think there are solutions out there and they're being implemented. I think the Ukrainian example is one that works very well. I know from my members that we have 20 to 30 seafarers that came this year because Transport Canada basically sealed a deal with Ukrainian recognizing their credential, and now seafarers from Ukraine are welcome to work on Canadian ships, and that's 2 ships right there that can be manned. So if that program continues and more of this credential recognition is done with other countries, there's definitely a way to welcome seafarers.
Sure, and Mr. Baima, I have a comment, but can you quantify that? I guess?
Well, I can't quantify. I can't quantify, but I'd like to continue on the point. The agreement with Ukraine was signed. There is an agreement with France, Norway, Australia, Georgia, and the Kenyan government is looking at signing an agreement with Brunei, and then the Philippines. That agreement with the Philippines will open a whole bunch of doors that will be very helpful with Canada, for Canada. An agreement with India, which is also looked at and possibly in the list of countries, would be the most beneficial for us right after the one with the Philippines. So there are potential. We talk about negatives. There are positives as well, right? And we need to explore them.
Fair enough. And my time is probably winding down, but Mr. Carey, Corey, you referenced making trucking a skilled trade as in Europe, and maybe you could speak a little bit more, elaborate more on the European example, or if there are other jurisdictions that have best practices around that might be instructive for us?
A short response, please.
Just to say that, as I said, it's almost a default career now. People default to trucking, and it should be shown as a true vocation that is skilled, that requires a lot of responsibility, pays very well, has, it's a good environment to work in, and hopefully that will attract more people to that industry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muse. Next, we have Mr. Chahal. Mr. Chahal, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for joining us today. Mr. Corey, I'll start with you. Who are the truck drivers that are entering the industry today? Who are they? Where are they coming from?
Well, in speaking to some of my members, there aren't many entering the industry today. So that is the problem. The average age is just getting older and older with very few. It's a sort of a lifestyle issue. People don't want to be on the road. They don't want to be away from their family. They'd rather stay close. There are large groups of individuals who are involved in trucking that are coming from other countries, and that is good because they obviously see this as an opportunity. But I think part of the problem is that we don't have any infill at the bottom as the older drivers are leaving at the top.
And you talked about, I just want to finish off with Mr. Muse had left on making trucking a skilled trade. What are some specifics we have to do to make it a skilled trade, like maybe other countries, or is it a Red Seal program? We've talked about the opportunity as an internship type program where you can work with an experienced driver. What does that look like specifically?
Some of those things exactly. I mean, right now, it probably costs you about $10,000 to get the training required to get your license to drive a big rig. There needs to be some acceptance that this is an important job. And we saw that during the pandemic. I mean, if truck drivers didn't continue operating, we would have been in a jackpot. And so there needs to be some recognition that this is an important job in society. As I said, as it becomes more technologically bent, that may attract more people, younger people who are familiar with technology and want to embrace that. We're going to have things like platooning trucks, where you have 5 trucks with 1 driver. Autonomous trucking, I think that's way in the future. But those are kind of things that make this a kind of a, I don't want to say, but a bit of a sexy industry compared to what it is today. And I think that's what needs to happen to attract people.
So I'm going to go to a different line of questioning, and I want to hear from everybody. And I'll tell you a little bit where this is coming from. I represent a very diverse community in Northeast Calgary. Rail, airport, a lot of newcomers, and a lot of them work in the trucking industry. They work in distribution, warehousing, and we have a very vibrant inland port, which I think is going to really help with some of the supply chain challenges on the West Coast, and particularly as Prince Rupert grows. My question to you, and I hear this all the time from the industry, that the government needs to do something with labor. And I hear this all the time, but my question to you is, what is your organization doing to connect with labor, with diverse communities? And I'll start with yourself, Mr. Bouy.
Thank you for that question. It's a great question. We actually looked at a number of solutions in the past. We can talk about Indigenous communities, right? So a number of our members have programs to attract Indigenous people to the sector. Newcomers as well. Lots of work is being done with newcomers and making sure that when they're coming, because a lot of our ferries operate in remote and communities, so welcoming them in those communities, which is a challenge on occasion, right, for people to establish in something completely remote there. So we are doing a lot of work. Can more be done? Absolutely. Always more can be done, but I can assure you that there is a lot of work being done by our members.
So just to follow up, is your organization going out to those communities, or are you offering training, incentives, or are you looking at government to do that for you?
I don't. You'll never hear me saying government is a solution to everything. Our members are doing their part and need to do their part. It's too easy to just say the government is responsible for everything. No, our members are doing their part in making sure that people are welcome and people are trained. They are doing training. When we ask the government to do things, it's really related to regulations and opening up some doors for us. We are working with the communities. We are looking at doing a number of things. We are welcoming Ukrainian immigrants, refugees at this point. And there we are looking at, I'm going to probably be going to the Philippines to attract new people in the recent future. So there is a lot of work we are doing specifically.
I want to give a 15 seconds to each of you because that's all I got left. So go ahead, Mr.
Well, the Canadian Marine Imagine Foundation is exactly that, dedicated to spread the good word about the industry and just do outreach to Indigenous communities, to people who are not necessarily represented in the industry. So the industry is very much active in its outreach, but funding would be greatly appreciated to do that through ESDC programming or EI benefits extended for training in seafaring, for sure.
My members are essentially shippers, so they would welcome any additional employees that they could hire. I think the ability to do that and the red tape around that could be reduced, which will facilitate that for everybody.
Thank you so much. Come to Calgary Skyview. I'll bring workers to work for you as long as you can well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chahal. Appreciate that. Next, we have Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to go directly to driver compensation and drill down into that area. I certainly grew up in a blue-collar town in Chilliwack and knew numerous people that raised families driving long-haul truck. It was certainly until a few years back that is what they did to put food on the table, and they lived a comfortable lifestyle. And I've heard stories since then about routes that they used to cover, the rates going back 20 years in time, and people, companies being undercutting what had been the going rate for a number of years, and clearly not paying the going rate or the prevailing wage previously to their drivers. So I want to talk a bit about mileage rates versus hourly rates, and what you're seeing. Are companies, are certain companies, some bad actors taking advantage of vulnerable people and not paying a fair wage or even minimum wage, it would seem, in some of these cases. And if we're going to ask companies to go to an hourly wage or believe that would help address the driver shortage, what are we doing to alleviate the dwelling times or the turnaround time problems at inland ports? I talked to one of my colleagues who said that he had a constituent reach out to him. He said he used to be able to turn a truck 1.8 times a day, and now he's lucky if he can turn one. So it's easy to say he should pay an hourly wage, but if he can't make, if his driver is not moving product because there are things are jammed up at the inland ports or at the rail or at the intermodal yards, etc., how are we going to do that? So I want to talk a bit about your concerns. Maybe I'll go to Mr. Corey first. Concerns about the wide variance in wages. Are people cheating the system? Is there any policing happening for that? If so, what is it? And then maybe we can talk, maybe some others can weigh in on the problems with port wait times, et cetera, that are going to make it more difficult to change the compensation model.
Thank you for that question. I would say that one of the problems with this is that it's not simple. In trucking, we're talking about multi-jurisdictional industry. Each province has its own regulations and rules, and it's very hard to coordinate that all at the same time to have an even sort of industry across the country. Just speaking from what I know about my members, saying that hourly wages make the job much more appealing. However, and your point is well taken, if you're sitting at a truck dwelling for 7 hours waiting to pick up a container, that's a lot of money wasted. So again, this situation or this issue is not single faceted. There are multiple players that will have to be multiple players will have to be affected by this. What causes that dwell time? Well, it means that maybe that's not as efficient at the intermodal yard. Maybe it's the railway that's having issues, and the trucker end up paying for it. And again, that's why having someone coordinating the supply chain to make sure that we don't waste money on additional infrastructure or additional things when we can use the assets we currently have more effectively is better for everyone. I don't have a simple answer for you. But I think, we have to look at all aspects of the situation, and there's a ripple effect right through the system.
Right, and I guess it becomes a less attractive, it's a chicken and egg thing. Is there a problem with the dwelling issue because there's not enough drivers, and is there not enough drivers because the compensation doesn't, there's not adequate compensation to make it a desirable job. So I think there's a bit of obviously the supply chain. Multiple committees are studying this. This committee studied it. Up and down the chain, I think there are problems. But I heard someone else. Maybe I don't know how much time I have left, but someone else wanted to weigh in on that.
20 seconds, Mr. Strahl.
I didn't know if Mr. Morel-Laforce had wanted to talk about
just
that
on the
issue.
dwelling time at ports, I think we talked data sharing and automation. There's definitely things that can be done, and port members have been working hard at lining up trucks with cargo quicker, and investment in new technologies can definitely help reducing wait time for truckers at ports.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morel-Laforce, and thank you, Mr. Strahl. Next, we have Mr. Iacono. Mr. Iacono, vous avez 5 minutes. La parole est à...
You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to say hello to the witnesses and thank them for being here. My first question is for Mr. Morel-Laforce. Now, are the labour shortages the most serious in the maritime transportation sector? And if so, why? Well, all vessel positions are in a critical situation, whether it be chefs, cooks, mariners, seafarers, through to the specialised positions. They are understaffed. There is no surplus position. Just to become a seafarer or a mariner, it takes 5 months training, can cost $50,000, and to train a chef, to feed a crew, it's expensive. For the specialised trades, it takes between 6 to 8 years to become a ship's captain. So, yes, that takes longer, but the fact of the matter is there are shortages across the board. There's talk of poaching employees in all sectors, and we see that on ships too. Well, just to focus in on the first part of your answer, you said across all sectors and all domains, actually. Now, we're in a post-pandemic context, but before 2019, what kind of labour situation did you find yourselves in? What did you do 3 or 4 years ago, knowing that if you did have a labour shortage, knowing that that was a problem? Or is this just simply in the wake of COVID-19? Response. Well, members have had to follow regulations, and it's been more difficult for mariners aboard ships who weren't able to get off board, but most of them were vaccinated and followed protocols. The supply chain wasn't affected entirely across Canada, but the foundation is devoted to ensuring that, to promoting the career of seafarer among our youth. We're talking about an entry salary of $60,000 that you can get a wage of up to $200,000. And of course, there's smaller stints out at sea nowadays, which is good for some people. But unfortunately, the regulations and legislation federally does hurt the industry. How is the new technology helping to address the labour shortage? I was in Taiwan last week, and based on what I understand, in Taiwan, at each shift, there used to be 40 employees. Now, when they started to convert using new technologies, they no longer needed 40 employees per shift, only 18 per shift. So that makes a world of a difference. In your world, how do you perceive the impacts of technology? Well, the number of mariners on ships has dropped over recent years, and technology is evolving, but that's already being factored in. There are gains, but the regulations need to be as modern as the ships themselves. That's a real issue. There needs to be a better consultative process with the industry when it comes time to developing regulations. Employment and Social Development just introduced new regulations, which isn't in line with Transport Canada's regulations. So the industry has to deal with two different sets of regulations that affect mariners that don't say the same things. Now, neither department can really tell us which regulations will take precedence. This adds layers of cost on the industry. It's a puzzle for us, and we don't really have good results out in the field. Next question is for Mr. Corey and also Mr. Bui. To what extent are various levels of governments and jurisdictions in Canada working together to address the labour shortage? Is there a coordinated approach across Canada?
I would say at this time there is not much coordination, which is the root of the problem. I think there needs to be more coordination throughout all levels of government to address this issue. Thank you.
Yeah, our sector is federally regulated, sir. It comes back to the federal government and federal regulations on this.
Thank you. Et ma prochaine question.
Next question.
Mr. Iacono, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Next questioner, Mr. Baslo Duval. You have 2.5 minutes, sir. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Question for Mr. Corey. Earlier we talked about new technologies, and Mr. Iacono was referring to that too. In the sectors that you represent, with automation and new technologies, is that part of the solution, and do you have any examples you might share with us today?
I think that is part of the answer. Technology, as an example given, reducing the number of people on board ship through the use of technology is helpful. I was just recently at a member's facility where they have robotics now stuffing and packing pallets. That takes the place of multiple people. And in fact, unfortunately or fortunately, the robots do a better job of packing because it's quicker, there's no breaks, they can work 24/7. So there are some technologies that can help yes. Having said that, there are many other, the problem with labor generally is that because less people are working in transportation doesn't mean there's less people working. There are other sectors where people can work. And so technology, I think, is something that is inevitable. It's something we're going to deal with. It's not something that's going to change. And I think embracing it is the way to go. But yes, it can help to alleviate the number of employees required in transportation. Thank you.
I don't have much time I have left. 45 seconds, sir. Well, Mr. Bui, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to the conversation thus far. Well, listen, the only thing I'd say is this. There are solutions that can be brought to the table, among other things, federal regulations that might be helpful, and also agreements could be signed internationally. We're not talking about millions of dollars here. If you look at our recommendations, some of them can be put in place quite quickly at minimal cost, and that might give us a bit of breathing room for some time. It would be helpful if the committee looked more closely at our recommendations with a view to implementing them.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Baslo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baslo Duval.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Corey, earlier you had some remarks about the rail sector and some of the retention challenges and concerns around conditions of work. Mm-hmm. In Northwest BC, there are hundreds of men and women that work on the trains. And, I talked to one gentleman recently who was relatively new to the industry, and he quit and moved to another sector because he was concerned for his safety. I also hear about the challenges of scheduling, the lack of fatigue management, and a whole host of other concerns. It's something this committee has done work on in the past year. I'm wondering to what degree does the safety culture in the rail sector and the safety performance of rail companies need to improve in order to retain and attract workers to that sector?
Both Canadian Railways, CN and CP, often tout their safety records, but in reality, I think they could do a lot more to make a safe workplace. That much of that burden is borne by those employees, and as you point out, many employees who think the rail industry is a good place to work find out that maybe it's not the best place that they want to work in. Again, the railways are driven by their operating ratios and meeting their quarterly numbers. That means if we can save some money, let's do it. And often that means cutting the workforce to achieve that quickly. That's very short-sighted, and it has consequences going forward. One of them is poor performance of the railway, but also the safety of the employees.
And are there regulations that the federal government could put in place to address those things?
There probably are regulations already in place. The question is, are they enforced?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we go back to Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. My question will be for Mr. Corey and Mr. Bai. You spoke about the shortage in the labor shortage, and there were similar shortages in the agricultural sector. That sector had serious problems with the ability to get their products to market and to get them on our tables. And so they came up with the seasonal agricultural worker program. Similarly, people who worked shifts were unable to find reliable childcare, and then the government came up with the Living Caregiver Program. Now, the Living Caregiver Program has the capacity for people to apply for permanent residency, and that would attract really skilled people who probably ordinarily wouldn't go into that area. But afterwards, sometimes they even went on to become nurses and did things that that enhanced their lives and also our economy. Do you project that a program similar to that could be put in place in order to induce strong candidates to come and work as truck drivers and in seafaring occupations? And what would that look like?
I'm not a labor expert, but I think that if we do have a framework that can attract workers from other places, that has the potential for them to have good quality jobs, and not only for half a year but for the whole year, I think that would be extremely good. I think it would be not that difficult to do because there's already people who want to come to Canada for various reasons. Having jobs available for them when they get here, I think only enhances our stature as a place where people want to come.
I think one of the key things that people look at when they come to Canada is they've been trained in their own country, they've done a lot of work to get that training, and they come to Canada and their credentials are not recognized. And that's disappointing for them when they are training to international standards, such as IMO standards, STCW standards as well. So I think for what we can do is look at the credential recognition on that, and we are starting, as I mentioned, with bilateral agreements. We need to up our game on this and move faster on this, and then and that will have a definite help, Madam Lewis, Dr. Lewis.
And if that program leads to permanent residency, what do you think would be a good amount of years for those individuals to work, to be completely trained so that they could really be good, strong contributing members for long term? Would it be 2 years, 1 year?
I would just say that whatever the requirements currently are for those industries, whether it's rail or trucking, they would obviously have to meet those requirements. There's often also a language issue involved, and I think that's a very important component of it also.
On our side, there's a bit less of a language issue. A lot of, although it does exist, but there's a little bit less because some of the training is already done in English in other countries, or French in other countries as well. So a bit less on our side, but training, it depends. It can be a 1 year to go up to the position that people want to be in.
Okay. How much more time do I have?
You have 1 minute, 20 seconds, Dr. Lewis.
Okay, I'm going to yield that time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. And finally tonight, we have Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our guest. Welcome to the committee. Of course, I live on an island, and that's why I'm going to focus on the marine sector side. Mr. Lewis talked about how the Newfoundlanders and Labradorians work on lake boats. That's been a thing that's been happening in our province for generations. And of course, 100% of the transportation mode in Newfoundland 60, 70, 80 years ago was primarily boats. So when I was a high school teacher, we implemented a program in grade 10 to bring the curriculum of the Marine Institute at Memorial University into the classroom in grade 10 to create awareness among high school students. And it's generated dozens and dozens of students that have gone to the Marine Institute and are now working in offshore supply boats and different kinds of boats, fishery boats and all the rest. So I want to ask you this question, Mr. B, and on an awareness side, do you know, do young people know that there are jobs available in this sector, and what data do you have on this, and how is the industry communicating with them? Because we did the programming in the high school in Harbour Breton, where I taught school, to create that awareness. So what has the industry done to create awareness about what types of jobs are available and how well paying some of these jobs are?
Ultimately, the operators themselves are promoting the jobs, and indeed, I'm aware of a number of operators that are in schools that are promoting the programs, explaining the jobs. The Imagine Marine Industry Foundation is also doing a great job on that front, but our operators are in schools and are promoting this. One of your colleagues asked, what do you do yourself? We are actually putting a scholarship in place for to help young women that want to train in the marine sector on that front. So there is a lot of activities that is done by operators, by the association and others on that front. But you're correct. I would say it's not even just high school now. It's elementary school that we need to reach to students.
Yeah, the industry is getting more and more active in spreading the good word on that sense for attracting people to the training facilities. But these training facilities are in a tough spot where provinces see the seafaring careers as a federal obligation, and they often tell them that it's up to the federal government to fund them. And we're talking funding for simulators, for top of the art machinery, so that students can train on up-to-date classrooms. And yes, the industry is looking for the federal government to step in because it's federally regulated, and provinces have a tendency of looking at the federal government for funding these initiatives from schools. The same can be said for supporting future seafarers to go through the curriculum. So once they're enrolled, to have similar benefits to like the Red Seals are having, or other sectors of the economy that are supported by the federal government, to just encourage the completion of course and their cadet years as well.
Thank you very much. I know the Marine Institute makes a tremendous contribution to the marine sector in Newfoundland and Labrador, and actually across the country. I know Mr. Badaway wanted to ask another question, so I'm going to cede the rest of my time to my colleague, Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers, and I'll be quick. And I think a lot of the discussion, and Mr. Corey, I give you a lot of credit looking forward in trying to modernize transportation specialists. I'll call them that. And I want to go down that road. I want to get a bit more granular on that. We have people being trained to be truck drivers, and I mentioned it earlier, pilots, captains, engineers on trains. Do you see an opportunity, frankly, that we can now to give more, I guess, exposure, acceptance by those that don't just simply want to be a truck driver or a captain or a pilot or an engineer? Do you see an opportunity that we can add more corporate value by introducing, the sector introducing, a rebranded transportation specialist that would not just drive a truck or fly a plane or captain a ship or an engineer on a train, but in fact would also be a data and logistics manager. And I think a perfect example of that is Dell Computers. when they move their product around, they're eliminating warehousing, and they're actually getting their product on the road before it even has a destination. So do you see an opportunity there, therefore, once again, adding corporate value as well as adding as an attraction to those that may want to get into that business, more so than what's available to each individual today?
The supply chain, let's face it, 10 years ago, no one knew what a supply chain was, and now we're having committee meetings about it. It's very important now. But a supply chain is not only people sitting in a cab or in a train or on a boat. There is, as you point out, there's a whole layer with the digitalization of it and also the data component of it. I think there could be more done to attract people into that sector, the supply chain business, whatever that we may call it. I think the data component of it is going to be huge. There was some discussion about, data already. I think the ports are ahead of the game on that, collecting data. We need to get the railways in there, we need to get trucking in there, and we need just-in-time data. I mean, currently data is collected and it's like 2 years old before anyone sees it. Just-in-time is what shippers need, and I think what operators need also. And that's how you make good decisions, by knowing what's happening today, not what happened 2 years ago. So there's a lot, I think, of potential for those kinds of highly technical jobs in the supply chain industry.
Thank you. And
Thank you very much, Mr. Badaway. That takes into consideration the time that Dr. Lewis had ceded to Mr. Rogers. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of our witnesses for being here this afternoon and for contributing to this very important study. This concludes the questioning for today, so please feel free to leave at your convenience. Colleagues, we'll now turn to committee business with one item on the agenda, which is an item that I had a chance to speak to many of you about previously at the last meeting, which is a motion that we adopted in the previous session to approve committee travel for the visiting of various ports across the country. Given that we didn't have an opportunity to plan that out for the time between now and December 31st, the clerk has advised me that we need to adopt another motion to resubmit that funding request so that we have an opportunity, should we wish to do so, to visit these ports in the session to come, in the winter session. So I'm asking colleagues for unanimous consent if there's any objection to us resubmitting the request. Mr. Clerk, you'll have to tell me if there's any objection to this. Yes, Mr. Strahl.
Mr. Chair, just quickly, if I might.
Yes, sir.
Were we successful, or were you successful in having the liaison committee approve that, or was it in, do we need to modify it at all, or is it just a matter of changing dates?
It's just a matter of changing dates. We were successful in securing that funding, Mr. Strahl.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, if I may. Yes, Mr. Barcelot-Duval. Since there is a proposal to resubmit a proposal for committee travel, we submitted one on the shore erosion, and I wonder if it might be an opportune moment to resubmit that travel proposal on shore erosion.
Merci, Mr. Barcelot-Duval. I'll talk to the clerk just to get his guidance on that. We can do both? Parfait. Donc, on va faire les deux.
We'll do both.
Yes, Mr. Badaway.
Thank you. Just to add a bit more meat to the bone on this one, I think with respect to all the studies that we've been doing vis-a-vis the transportation logistics study, supply chain study, the expectation that the ports modernization may come to us, as well as the study that we're doing right now with respect to labor shortages, this trip or these trips across the country and visiting these areas will actually add to the knowledge of the committee to see it firsthand what we're dealing with here. And I think what's most important is not only what we're dealing with today, but in fact how we're going to deal with it in the future. Because to some extent, it's archaic. And if you live in a community like I do that has transportation attached to it as a strength, it's very disheartening to see how archaic it is in comparison to if it's strengthened and the capacity builds. It was mentioned about the St. Lawrence Seaway only working at 50% capacity. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. And we have to, as a committee, see that, so that therefore, when we're moving forward with those strategies, we actually can put the again, to meet to the bone on it. So it's wonderful if we can get out there and see it firsthand. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway. And for the new members that just recently joined the committee, we can ensure that the list of ports that were approved and that were highlighted is sent around to all of you.
Just one other question. We did have a witness mention the Port Modernization Act. How is the timing? Like, how is the chronology working here? Are we going to get a report back that we then are going back to ports to have another look at? I understand the desire to get out and move around, and we've, obviously ports will continue to be an issue. That's a question for the parliamentary secretary or the government side. Do we have any indication of when that issue may be back on our lap, and can we time it up perfectly, or are we going to just take the risk that we're going to do this first and deal with it again later?
So before I turn it over to the parliamentary secretary, first of all, thanks for the question, Mr. Strahl. Before I turn it over to the parliamentary secretary, I just want to point out that this is just we can have discussions about whether or not we even do this, whether or not the timing works out in the future. This is just to ensure that should the committee decide at some point, and the timing does indeed work out for us on this, that the funding is there to be able to do it. So this is not a commitment that we are going to do it. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah,
okay.
That's good.
So seeing no other comments or questions, any objections to the clerk resubmitting the request? Seeing none, it is adopted. Thank you very much, colleagues. Seeing no other business, the meeting is concluded. Adjourned. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.